Hello, hello. Welcome to the Shine a Light Autistic Advocate campaign. We are kicking off our very first live panel conversation today, all around the topic of accessibility. And today we're talking about accessibility in the workplace. This is one of the top areas that our autistic community says, hey, we've got some big accessibility challenges and we want to talk about this. And I am being joined today by some of the most incredible autistic advocates in this space talking about accessibility in the workplace. We want to be talking today about what does accessibility mean exactly? What does it mean to us individually as advocates? We want to talk about who's doing it well, who is doing accessibility ability in the workplace well. We're also going to be talking about some of the barriers, some of the biggest barriers. And Cora Burke kicked us off with a really great topic today over on LinkedIn, talking about some of those automated application systems. And I know that we all had an experience with that to some degree somewhere, and there's a lot to talk about on that one. In the intersections of barriers and accessibility in the workplace, because as an autistic community, we are a beautiful variety of people and we have a lot of different intersections, and those things play into accessibility, and we're going to be talking about that as well. And we'll be wrapping up with some of the biggest accessibility insights and just takeaways, and diving into what are the things that we would like companies to know, what are some things that we'd like other autistics to know about accessibility in the workplace. So stick around, we're about to get started.
Hi, I'm Carol Jean, late identified autistic ADHD human, and your host of the Mind Your Autistic Brain talk show and Burnout Restoration Unveilers community. You're about to experience the new way to thrive as a neurodistinct brain and body by getting off the chronic cycle burnout loop for good. By unveiling your authentic self, defining what thriving feels like for you, knowing your burnout signpost, so those top 20 burnout warning signs are a thing of the past, and stepping into your best life as the creator and leader you are meant to be. Get ready, because this is where we go against the mainstream, say no to outdated self-care tips, and we say yes to who we are in order to create an energized, authentic, peaceful, and harmonized world. Welcome to Mind Your Autistic Brain.
Wow, welcome to the show. Oh my goodness. This, my friends, is a power-packed panel, in my opinion. And I am so excited to have each and every one of you here today. As we're talking about accessibility, oh my gosh, we are really talking about just the ease of use, being able to access, to utilize something. But accessibility means something different to each person. Yes, that's sort of the overarching thing of what accessibility is, but what does accessibility mean to each one of you? And I'm just going to kind of go around the room, and if you want to add to this, great. If not, and you're just like, nope, I'll pass on this one, that's totally okay too. So Scott Fraisard, please kick us off if you don't mind. What does accessibility mean to you in the workplace?
Actually, I think that's a great question. To me, accessibility in the workplace is about having support needs met. And this is actually something that I wrote an article last year about rethinking support needs. And probably one of the biggest things that is problematic is a lack of specificity. And I put that onto myself. If we think about it from an individual standpoint, what do we need for support? And I sat down and thought about it last year and wrote that article. And I think we overlook a lot of things that we take for granted as support. Just to give a couple examples, time and space to recharge before or after social engagements, time and space to engage in routines or ask questions about clarification or message meaning, that sort of stuff. So to me, accessibility is about being supported in a way that matters to you, that helps you do the work that you do, or anything in that area. And that's part of where a lack of specificity, I think, it still exists.
I think we could probably, I think I saw a lot of nodding as we were talking about specificity there. Jennifer Williams, thank you so much for being here. Do you have something you'd like to add about what accessibility means to you in the workplace?
So I think it really depends on the workplace. I think there are different needs that you need in different locations. So in past office jobs that I've had, that may mean, higher walls so that I'm not distracted by people walking by. That might also mean, like in a remote setting, that recharge time that he was talking about, not having back-to-back meetings. So I think that truly it's something that's individualistic, and it really involves communication of what that need is at that particular workplace.
Ooh, that's a really good point because, every situation and every environment is different. Piper Hudson, thank you so much for being here. Oh my goodness. So you are joining us today as part of this conversation. And I know that accessibility is a really big thing. Like a couple months ago, you had shared, hey, I walked into a workspace and there was no paper. There was nothing to write with. What the heck? I mean, we're talking like basic pen and paper here. What is like an accessibility issue that other, like including those types of things that you face in the workplace or that means to you?
Right now, this is wonderful. Having people that what I thought were little idiosyncrasies about myself in the workplace be things that other people struggle to say, hey, this bothers me. But since as a collective group, we tend to be a little quieter. So thanks to people like you who are so wonderful that every time I talk to you, I end up leaving the room being like, oh, that's right. There are people who make me feel like I'm wonderful. So accessibility to me is environments that don't keep me quiet.
Well, that's powerful.
So go ahead.
That right there, like that's one of those mic drop kind of things. Oh my gosh, yes, please. More spaces that our voices can be heard and it's not psychologically unsafe, right? And especially as we're talking about psychological safety as an element to accessibility. Sydney Elaine Butler, oh my gosh, Accessible Creates. This is such a great honor to have you here. So Sydney is part of the Mind Your Autistic Brain Neurodrive team for the workforce. And so I love that I have one of my team here in the room today. Sydney, what does accessibility mean to you? I mean, this is your jam, my friend.
This is my wheelhouse. But to me, accessibility means that everyone has access. Right now, a lot of accessibility is like synonymous with disabilities, but at the end of the day, it means everyone has access. And what I mean by everyone has access, people have access to the resources they need, to the opportunities they need, to the environment they need. They have what they need to thrive at the end of the day.
And I quoted you as a highlight in your blog article for the Brain Dump the other day because that was a point that you made. And I love that you followed it up with, and I'm going to highlight this again because I think you're such a genius. It's not just having our needs met in accessibility, but it's that the people who are in charge of creating accessibility and making things accessible aren't doing it from a place of this is what I think somebody else needs. They're actually asking the questions to have the needs of the people in the environment met and not what they assume needs to be met.
Exactly.
Lex Harvey Bryn, oh my goodness. Thank you so much for being here. Lex, what does accessibility mean to you? Now, you're in the UK. There's different factors all across the board, like Sydney's in Canada. We've got a global group here. We are a global audience. What are some of the things that accessibility may be a little different, or what does that mean to you in the UK, Lex?
There's an awful lot I can mirror from what people have already talked about. I mean, very much my belief is that true accessibility is about being flexible and adapting to the needs of each individual. And I love the fact that you just mentioned psychological safety, because so often that's the thing that I see over and over again is people feeling unsafe in the workplace and psychologically unsafe. It's not that they're worried about being harmed physically, and it's because there's nothing tangible that you can hold on to. It feels confusing. And the other thing I would say that I'd want to add to that as well is about actually being believed, because sometimes our struggles, again, aren't something that someone else can observe or experience. So they're actually being believed for how some days it's okay and some days it's not, is an incredibly important part of how to make things accessible.
Oh, I think that's a really big one, Lex. It's, taking me at my word. And, when we talk about spiky profiles, well, some days I can do this particular task really well. Maybe another day I can't do it as well because, maybe my needs haven't been met as consistently throughout that particular day. And then there's other things that I excel in this one area and I really stink in this other particular area. And because I'm really good at this one thing, then my coworkers think, oh, well, she's really good at all of these other things. And, that alone can sort of factor into that. I love you brought up that element. Carrie Blackman is out in the audience and she said, true inclusion has to be done through a lens of accessibility. And I love that, because accessibility and inclusion, those kind of go hand in hand. I love that you brought that up, Carrie. Thank you. Charlie Hart. Oh my goodness.
Hi.
My beautiful friend. Oh, wow.
It's great to be
I am
here.
so excited you're here. Charlie, what does accessibility mean to you? You talk about accessibility from a lot of different lenses
I do.
and a lot of different intersections.
As an HR practitioner, I can give you the textbook definition, what I think it is, but then I've got a personal slant on it as well. So to me, it's about reducing and eliminating barriers to inclusion or success so that we can thrive in the workplace as individuals. So it's not something nice we do for disabled people. It's about respecting that all individuals have different needs, and there will be barriers to success for every individual, and getting to know those and break them down is accessibility to me. It's not something that happens automatically. It requires conscious thought. So all of us in this field, I think, will have heard of unconscious bias. So I just want to introduce the concept conscious inclusion. So let's not make assumptions, but actively find out what people need and what helps them thrive and be their best self and do their best job and want to stay long term.
Snaps on that one. I mean, yes, please, more of that. Conscious inclusion. Oh, wow. That's a powerful term because, I think unconscious bias, I mean, we all have it. And without consciously being proactive to say, what am I not seeing? Because, as humans, we have blind spots. And it's so often that we feel embarrassed or we're intimidated or we feel, really uncomfortable because we don't want to make a mistake. And I think when we're talking about accessibility, that seems to be something that comes up a lot is I see a lot of companies that they want to do it well, but they're afraid.
And the pandemic has brought a lot of Teams meetings and Zoom meetings in the workplace where there could be an unconscious bias that assumes that if someone doesn't speak up like this, that they've got nothing to say. And sometimes it might be that they're uncomfortable in an online meeting and they would rather make their points in a separate email or a text conversation or just one-to-one rather than in front of everybody. And it's quite a different power dynamic when you're in a meeting and an online meeting. It really needs to be facilitated really well to give everybody a voice. And that doesn't just happen. Again, it's conscious inclusion.
I love that. I think we can all take that beautiful term away with us today, conscious inclusion. Thank you for sharing that, Charlie. Say that. I just love your brain. It's such a wonderful thing. Oh, wow. So we're moving on to Miss Cora Burke, who is the leader of the Neuro Rebellion, and she is incredible. Guys, Cora is just, if you haven't followed her yet, please go do so over on LinkedIn because you're missing some really incredible conversations and one that she kicked off today that we're going to be picking up a little bit later in the conversation. Cora, what does accessibility mean to you in the workplace?
For me, and thank you for that intro, it's leveling barriers, and it's also leveling the base point from which we approach things like healthcare, education, housing, gainful employment and justice. And that's a really important point for me, because here in the UK, we have something called the Equality Act. And funnily enough, the judiciary is exempt from the provisions of the Equality Act. And, you know, that just sits so badly with me, because when I take clients through employment tribunals, I expect that they get a fair and reasonable trial. But how can that happen when the judiciary is not held to the same standard as everybody else? So I strongly feel that, you know, justice is not accessible. And there are other situations that are also not accessible, not inclusive. For me, accessibility has to be by design, which is kind of what Charlie was alluding to. And I also very strongly feel that accessibility is the logical thing to do, because I look at it from a point of view of continuous improvement. You know, if a large proportion of society says to an organization, hey, you know what, your processes aren't working for me, then it's only logical that you redesign it. With us, not without us. It is nothing about us without us. And that's what's going wrong in the whole DEI process, because lots of people pay a lot of money for these DEI consultants, but are they actually neurodivergent? And the answer often is no, and that is what's wrong. And that's where we're coming back to what Chari was saying. Conscious, sorry, the word slipped out of my mind. Hey, neurodiversity here.
Inclusion.
Yeah.
Conscious inclusion. But that's what accessibility is for me.
I love that you talk about, you know, being mindful, having conversations, making sure that the people who are impacted are at the table as part of the conversation, and not just an afterthought.
We have to be, because we're the experts in our brains, you know.
I think so much of this comes back to something that Jessica Michaels and I talk about a lot as we're doing like performance management training from a neuro-inclusive lens, and that is compassionate curiosity. How much compassionate curiosity do we show up with every day in our own life about ourselves, no matter our neurotype? And how is that translating in the workplace? Because if we are, from a workplace standpoint, being compassionately curious, then we're asking questions and we're listening. We're not approaching things from the lens that, oh, I think I understand this, but it's, you know, I don't know if I understand this at all. Can you share with me? Can you tell me what your experience is? And then listen. Actually actively listen, right? So guys, who is doing accessibility in the workplace well right now? Who is, you know, who's a company or a place maybe that you've seen, or a company that you've worked with, or that you maybe have had a friend work with, and you're like, hey, they're actually doing this pretty well. You jump on in, anybody, just sort of take off with it.
I want to say BAE Systems here in the UK. I recently had an interview with them, and regrettably, I wasn't progressed for it, but I was so impressed with their processes. I asked for interview questions up front, no questions asked 2 weeks beforehand. I had their interview questions. They were really caring, literally from the security people when I entered the gate all the way through the process. And literally, DEI is embedded all the way through the organization. They have all sorts of groups for all sorts of protected characteristics, as it is, you know, called here. So whether it's race or disability or gender, all the intersections, it is thoroughly and truly embedded. I was so impressed with that organization. It's amazing. So yeah, big thumbs up, BAE. Well done.
BAE Systems. Okay, because Elizabeth was just asking. she didn't quite catch it, I don't think. And I think my ears are a little slow. So BAE Systems in the UK.
Yeah, it's a big global defense organization.
Yes. Anybody else have a company that you think's really doing it well? Scott?
So I'm going to have to toot my own horn here a little bit. I work for Salesforce, which is a global CRM platform, and I'm a manager in our credentials team. So those certification exams that we have, I actually implemented a DEI initiative of sorts to where we are now doing neurodivergent specific reviews on all of our test questions. And I've started doing what's called a disparate impact analysis, comparing people who self-identify as neurodivergent compared to those who self-identify as not, to see if there is a negative impact on the scores of those exams based on their self-identified neurotype. And I'm happy to say, for the one exam that we just started off doing this with, there is no statistically significant difference. So what we did to review those items through the neurodivergent lens worked.
Cool. Congratulations. That is exciting. That is really big. So yay for Scott and yay for Salesforce and,
Thank you.
and BAE Systems. Anybody else want to add any companies that you think are doing accessibility right now really well? Let's definitely shine a light on folks that are doing the work out there.
I will hop in, coming from an American standpoint that does not hide how much she loves British culture. I'm a 19th century British specialist, and I fell in love with much of their positive framework just from the outset. Every time I felt good about conversing with an individual who proudly proclaimed themselves as autistic was over in the UK. That's where I saw that it was not considered an immediate disability. It was considered just a different way of thought. And America is slowly coming up on this neurodiversity social movement away from medical. But the UK has been killing it for quite a while on just recognition. I'd say that progressive wise, where many opportunities in America are still just doing awareness, let alone acceptance and moving past that, because we're still at that awareness stage that we exist and we're not what you think exactly, and we are in your companies. Tech companies figured it out very quickly because the ROI was easily discernible in metrics when it comes to computing. But outside of tech, there are not a lot of resources. I'm incredibly grateful for finding people within the academics field. Like Lindenwood University has done so many different case studies integrating autistic individuals into the technological universe to kind of set them forward, already knowing AI, already understanding how it benefits their neurological differences to be in that space. So I'm thrilled with the grassroots movement at different universities that are showcasing external ways outside of tech and science industries.
I'm glad you brought that up because, that's definitely something that we're going to be talking about in our education panel at the end of the month. And it's like, universities that are doing this well because they're also an employment ecosystem. They're a workplace, not just an education space. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Piper. I know NYU, UCLA, lots of those institutions from a hiring and staffing workplace standpoint are doing a pretty decent job of accessibility. A company that I would really like to highlight who I think is doing accessibility very well is NBC Universal Studios. I have been very, very impressed with the accessibility initiatives and with across the board in their journalistic approach to storytelling. They're talking in the background about what are the accessibility and access issues that we need to make sure that we're being mindful of. What are the intersections and that may create barriers to accessibility? And I think NBC Universal is really doing an excellent job around that. Does anybody else have any other companies or any workspaces that you'd like to add? Yeah, Lex.
I actually just wanted to sort of I don't know how Charlie and Cora feel, but I feel sometimes the UK, we're kind of in the same place as far as we're really just teetering on that awareness. And I think we very much mirror what you said is going on in the States at the moment. I don't know if Charlie or Cora would agree, but very much still at that awareness that we exist, that we are here. But one of the companies, I mean, there's lots that I'm seeing that are doing some really great stuff, but ones that I've worked with recently, and one that really stood out, it was the Royal Horticultural Society, and I hope they don't mind me mentioning them, but right from their leadership to the team leading on making this change of this awareness, they were just phenomenal, and really impressed me as far as their approach to how they wanted to engage and change the culture and the way that they supported all of their staff, and in this piece of work I did with them on neurodiversity. So they definitely deserve a shout out because they were fantastic.
Thank you for sharing that, Lex. So guys, I want to move in and let's talk about some of the barriers. Yeah, I know it's a big topic. But I'd love to highlight and just sort of talk about maybe even just your own experience of a barrier in the workplace that has made work a challenge, or that has made some aspects of work or all of work at some point in your life. Because I think maybe we have all faced that, and for me, burnout is my jam. It's what I'm always talking about. To me, accessibility and burnout are the sort of the hand in hand things. I can't show up and be in my job and work and do the things that I love to do if I'm in burnout. And the things that contribute to burnout in the workplace, the biggest thing is accessibility. And what does that mean? So what is, maybe Scott, I'm just going to kind of go around the room here in the order that's on my screen. What's a barrier that you really feel is an accessibility challenge in the workplace that we really need to talk about, or that companies need to be mindful of?
The first thing that comes to my mind is just a fixed mindset of this is how things have to happen, and not allow for trying different ways to see if we can achieve the same or even better results. A classic example that's been going on for the last couple of years is the whole work from home. It has definitely changed how I work, and it has changed my entire life, actually. But it took a pandemic to make that happen. Before that, working from home one day a week was a luxury that was only for the worthy. So just having that fixed mindset and not stepping out of the way we've always done things.
Jennifer, I see you nodding and smiling over there. What are some accessibility barriers that you are really thinking about that's kind of on your mind today?
Well, I echo what he said. And the personal experience I'm going to bring up is a past workplace that it was very much, you need to be in a cubicle to do your job. And it was a large company, but I went through the accommodation process and requested, I was really where I was located. I was like on a path that, there was someone on it there was constantly someone passing by. And I went through this process with HR, and though they were willing to accommodate me, it was a long process to put up additional, just barriers around the cubicle, so I wasn't constantly interrupted by the shuffling of people going by. And for a while, they were like, well, we'll just put you in this office. But that caused what I think is the other issue that employers really need to look at. I was being treated differently, and no one explained them why, like other people. And so that was perceived as a point of almost jealousy. Why does she get to sit in the side room instead of me? I'm distracted. But it was actually something that I needed accommodated for, because I couldn't work. I literally couldn't work because someone was passing me constantly, and it was so much of a distraction. So when I asked for that accommodation, it was slow process to getting those things placed. And I was given other accommodations in lieu of, well, we're getting this resolved for you, but the communication that never took place from human resources to educate others that I worked with that it wasn't a special treatment, that it was an accommodation. And I do think that caused a little bit of not hostility, but jealousy that I was getting an accommodation. And I feel globally employers could do better with this. They don't have to maybe point out what your issue is, but can say, this is accommodation. This isn't special treatment. And so I think there's a lot of work that can be done on that. I saw Cora also sort of acknowledging that. So if you want.
I saw Cora clapping for sure. I think this is something I hear a lot, and I'm curious, do you guys hear this as frequently? And that is how long the process takes. Because by the time we've asked or requested an accommodation, we've already been struggling for quite a while, most of us, right? So the process itself to receive accommodation and then the communication, that Jennifer, I thank you for sharing that, because I think that's something that so many people have come across as part of that accessibility and accommodation challenge, is that there's the lack of effective communication within the teams. And it's not, and so often like that honest, that responsibility seems to fall on us. Like sometimes, like, why do I have to be the one to explain to everyone else why I need something? That's not necessarily the best conversation or place or position to put me in, to explain to my coworkers why I'm receiving something that may quote unquote look like special treatment. I think that's
Yes,
kind of a big
it caused a lot of just generalized conflict for me because no one communicated with anyone else. And finally, someone who, maybe probably jealous would get confrontational with me. And I'm like, look, I can't continue to do my work at home because I'm so distracted at work. And that was really the penalty that I was paying, because it took them around 3 months to actually accommodate me correctly. And in that 3 months time, like, I didn't want to lose my job because I wasn't being effective. So I had to accommodate myself by working at home additional hours to get the work done, because I couldn't get it done in the setting, in the environment that I was in.
Oh, I that is so relatable, so painfully relatable. Piper, I'm going to move to you next. Is what is a barrier or experience that you face with accessibility in the workplace that you'd like to highlight or share?
Well, I didn't think about sharing this until Jennifer just shared. I don't have accommodations. I've only learned about my brain and the wonderful community that I belong in and how they have adapted to their experience. Sometimes I think being an educator and an academic, I've kind of fallen in the cracks of being allowed to be in my own space and kind of getting away with not having to be people facing. And so the more that the pandemic showed me how much I mask and how much energy I'm drained around it, the more I came to understand I needed to speak up about it. But I don't know the accommodations process for myself at the moment, because I'm still in the accommodations. The UK calls it productivity enhancers. If somebody asked me what productivity enhancer I wanted, I would find out in a minute.
Yeah.
But if someone's asking me how they can accommodate the environment that causes me to act differently than I act if I'm in a comfortable environment, I'm like, I don't even want to have this talk. So I'm afraid that I cannot fully talk about how long it takes, since I'm not there yet.
I think just sharing, because I think so many people are in that same place, Piper, that you're experiencing, is like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about what I might need in my environment to be more productive. What would actually support me so that my performance matches, my abilities, and I'm not being, handicapped and had my hand tied behind my back and, Because sometimes I feel like that's what our environments are doing. They're saying, okay, you gotta hang hangers, and we're just gonna give you 1 foot to do it with. I mean, that's almost kind of like that feels.
So many barriers to success, isn't there?
It really is. And it's, sometimes it's just saying, it's to say I needed to learn more about myself and my own needs is really a big deal, because I also have alexithymia. I don't know how many of you guys in this room also are alexithymic, but it's like, I didn't even know what I needed to ask for it. I've just been struggling and pushing through for so long that I don't, it has really been a process. And I didn't have anyone really to mentor and take me through that, because when I started this journey, it was almost a decade ago, and there wasn't a whole lot happening in the world talking about this. Sydney, what are some barriers or accessibility things that have come up for you that you feel this is a big barrier?
Well, I think, to echo kind of what everyone said, but I think it all stems from editorial barriers. And so how people perceive, neurodiversity, and perceive people that are autistic, have ADHD, have a different neurotype, even disability. And I think even our own editorial barriers towards ourselves, we don't know what we need sometimes, or we're like, oh, we were so used to accommodating for ourselves and just getting what we need. Like Jennifer said, she would take her work home and do it then, because, and so we're so used to accommodating for ourselves that we almost forget that we can ask for support. And then, because of the barriers and how people perceive us, and how we think HR is going to perceive us if we ask for accommodations. And there's so much around accommodation skills that needs to be changed, because accommodation, people think, oh, medical accommodation, you have to have a doctor's note, you have to have all these things in place. And they don't understand reasonable accommodation, just changing, not working in that cubicle, for example, for Jennifer again, just modifying it, again, and then having that communication piece of she's not getting special treatment, she's getting what she needs to be successful at her job. She's getting that accommodation. And so just really understanding people's perceptions of what disability looks like, and having that awareness piece. It's like, it looks different to everyone. Or then a lot of times too, like Piper said, talking about how she doesn't know what she needs, and working alongside your employer to be like, hey, I don't know what I need exactly. This is a new environment I'm in. Just having the conversation to see, let's see if this accommodation works. Did it work? Awesome. If it did, great. I can do my job better. If not, let's try another one, and just the trial and error. And especially with reasonable accommodation, it mostly can be for you, like just modifying your job duties, changing up the scheduling, and, just really looking at ways to better support.
So one of the things that I've been putting together is sort of an accommodations menu for companies to be able to use, because I think so often it's, I know for myself, and I know for a lot of my clients, I don't know necessarily what I need till I read it. And then I'm like, oh, actually, I do need that. I haven't thought about that. So in the sort of the same guise as the dopamine menu, I need this dopamine hits, and here's like where I get my menu of dopamine hits, like an accommodation menu that, this is something we provide for everyone as part of our company, culture and accessibility. Hey, here are the things that are available to you. Take a look at the list. If there's anything on here, just check the box here and we'll put this in place for you. Or we are already putting these things in place, and you get to choose if this is something you need or not, but it's already here and available for you. How about that approach? I mean, how much better would that be? Lex, what are some barriers in accessibility in the workplace that you'd like to highlight or talk about today?
Quite often, the first, I echo everything again that's already been said, but quite often the words reasonable adjustment seem to instill dread or fear into the eyes of managers who get that information. And I think quite a lot of managers or leaders in their businesses aren't equipped with the response to give somebody who says, I have these needs and I need some support to have them met. And quite often that then goes into people go into sort of like panic mode. And I quite often see almost one of three responses. One wonderful response where with compassion and kindness and wanting to support that person. Another one I see quite often is good intentions, but born from ignorance, and I don't mean to, I use the word literally, but it's loads of good intentions, but not enough asking the questions, understanding the challenges, and that's really hard because, you know, it's born from a good place. It's just that person's lack of awareness. And then there's quite often another response, which is, you're going to cause me a whole lot more work, and that's really uncomfortable for me. And the response that people get then is very delayed, very a real challenge, that person's an inconvenience to that person, and that's really tough, especially to triggering things like RSD and rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or it can be a double whammy for somebody who's plucked up the courage to get support, to be then met with a real barrier. So those are quite often the things that I see happen, is that people aren't equipped with the response to somebody when they disclose, and it's taken a lot of bravery for some people to come forward and say that. So having people that are equipped with the tools, or the way that they want to respond to people who have been able to push past that.
Ooh, Lex, you hit a big one right there. You really did. I think I hear this so often. And I know for myself, I've also experienced this. And it's, by the time you have worked up the courage to ask for this, then you are met. And I hear this from a lot of business leaders. And this is more work.
Or I hear, sorry to interrupt there.
Go ahead.
Or I hear, well, if we do this for that group of people, we have to do it for everybody. And then quite often I say, well, the kind of great things you can give to an autistic mind is great communication, really clear expectations, and no ambiguity. That's great for all minds, not just autistic minds. And that's quite often, again, what I come across a lot is that sort of perception that well, we're going to have to do it for everybody. Well, yes, we absolutely should. And I echo what I've heard a lot of today, is that this is not just accessibility for all minds, but particularly helpful in this with the discussions we're having. But the other thing as well, from personal experience, sharing some of the challenges that I've come across, is some perceptions around particularly my need for things to be correct. I don't want to be correct. I don't want to be right. Things need to be correct. And that can come across as me being difficult or nitpicky or problematic, but it's not. It's driven from that things need to be right, and they need to be correct and honest and open and transparent. And quite often that can come across or be met with people who seem as a bit of smarty pants, or being pedantic, and it's not that at all. Or I experience ADHD as well, so sometimes my fidgeting or my lack of expressions can look like I'm not listening, or look like I'm not interested, when actually my brain's going, wow, I'm so interested. Everything is but it's percolating in my brain, just going, wow. But it can often be perceived that, and I think a lot of the time the perception that people have, especially with things like doodling in meetings, you're not listening. Well, I'm listening because I'm doodling. And it's that lack of awareness that actually, if you helped people to understand the challenges with executive dysfunction, RSD, autism, ADHD, all of the different neurotypes, it then brings in an element of compassion, which then helps people to arrive at our disclosures with a much gentler hand.
Oh, yes to all of that, please. Charlie, barriers are something I know that you talk about a lot.
I do, yeah. So one theme I first wanted to touch on, here in the UK, we talk about reasonable adjustments. That is something from employment legislation, and it's to do with disability discrimination. So I'd really like to throw that in the bin, because I think all individuals need to be able to advocate for their needs in the workplace. And if we had a template where people could say, this is the way that I work, this is the way you can work with me in which I can thrive. Yes, it's helpful from an employment protection perspective, but it would help all people. And this is particularly important to me because I was late diagnosed autistic. I was as late as 42 years old, but I already had adjustments in place because at that time I believed I was just highly anxious and prone to burnout. So without a formal diagnosis of anything at all, I had adjustments in the workplace. My particular barriers, though, were when I then ended up in very pressured, very busy projects where, yes, I had a piece of paper that was signed, but it was lip service and wasn't really meant. And tangible things like, yes, you can work from home 2 days a week. That kind of adjustment is really easy to agree. It's very measurable and black and white. Whereas something like, I need clear and explicit instructions, preferably not verbal, that's harder. It's harder to agree to. And I can still, even without it in writing, I could still talk to my team and say, this is a barrier to me. If all of the actions you're giving me are verbal in meetings, I'm going to forget some of them. I'm going to get very flustered, very overwhelmed. And I can advocate in that way, very informally. But if people are busy and they don't listen and they think I'm exaggerating, or they think I'm not genuine there and I'm just being awkward and trying to cause them more work, then they're unlikely to accommodate that need. It's a very pronounced need that I've got, that I need to know what I'm doing. And it's not that I don't have autonomy and I'm not a self-starter and I'm lacking initiative. It's that if the actions come from someone else, I could just do with a little email with some bullets, so that I put them in my tasks, which is how I manage my workload and prioritize my own workload. If I go to a meeting, and this happens a lot in projects, I go to a meeting with a project manager, maybe a supplier, a customer, I don't know, maybe key stakeholders that might be quite senior. I'm going to spend that whole meeting masking my autistic traits, and that's really draining, and it really requires a lot of my effort and attention. I'm not going to be making any notes. They ask me to do this, that, and the other. I'll come out of that meeting. If I'm not straight into another meeting, I'll come out of that and I'll do the other. And then I'll rack my brains thinking, what was this? And then the following day in the next project meeting, have you done that? What was that? And I've got no idea. And it's not because I'm a bit dim or a bit unhelpful. It's because I have a poor working memory and I can't process that many things in a meeting where I'm heavily masking and then go away and make it all into deliverable tasks. So I've been in meetings where I've said, I need some bullet points with the things you want me to deliver and by when, and been told I don't have time to accommodate your individual need. And that same person has then said to me, moving on, can everyone review the 20-page well-being strategy I've just written? And I'm thinking, that's 20 pages of utter guff if you don't care about my individual needs. So don't say you're inclusive if all you're doing is helping people get in the door, but then not helping them thrive in their roles once they're there.
That, my friend, is a huge barrier. Oh my goodness. Yes. Cora, let's dive into some barriers and some, you got a barrier you've been started talking about today that I think is one that so many of us have come across, especially in the last couple of years, as all of these things have become more automated. What are some barriers that you'd like to talk about, Cora?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the barriers is knowledge of what your rights are and what on the employer side and what your duties are. So going to the point that you raised, you have the right to ask for, in the UK at least, reasonable adjustments to the hiring process. So what I've recently done is ask for the interview questions up front, because like Charlie, I struggle with working memory. I struggle with auditory processing. So if I have to do competency questions on the spot, I'm going to mess up. So one company was very good at it, one company not so good. And they said, if we do that, we give you an unreasonable advantage over other candidates. And I said, excuse me, that's not what reasonable adjustments are about. It's about leveling the playing field for those who come from a disadvantaged starting point. So in the end, they gave it like 4 hours beforehand, which was not great. But the other point that is also a major disadvantage for us, I feel, is the applicant tracking system. And anyone who's ever faced these automated pieces of software where you have to literally regurgitate every letter from your CV and put it into, these boxes that then, force you to select from a university or a degree that doesn't match what's on your CV. I frankly, I just turn off. If it's not a role I really, really want, I just say bye, I'll go to the next one. Scott waves. And I have worked in recruitment here in the UK for more than 20 years. I know how this industry works. And it's such a waste because, as I keep saying, and I work with, some top scientists here in the UK who are behind me and say, look, the whole hiring process needs to change, because if you list things that are as essential when they're not, you're turning people off. Here in the UK, the government is pushing people over the age of 40 over the age of 50 to stay working, to come back to the workplace after a pandemic. Why would you, when there's more than 85% of autistics are not in employment? I think there's only 35% of neurodivergent people who are in employment. Just make it easier for us to actually come to employment and stay in employment. And the ATS system is one of the biggest turnoffs for us because it's not suitable for us. It's easier for hiring managers and recruiters, but for us, it's a nightmare. And one of the things that in asking for reasonable adjustments, Lex touched upon it as well. One of the biggest problems, again, there is lack of knowledge, because what a lot of employers don't realize is that here in the UK, we have something called access to work. Now, if as both the person asking for the reasonable adjustment and the employer, you work together with the Department for Work and Pensions, which funds and arranges for access to work, you can actually get up to 100% of the cost of the reasonable adjustments via access to work. Why wouldn't you? There is so much knowledge that is not available. Well, it's available, but so much knowledge that people in HR and in employment situations, they don't have, but it is readily available. So don't come up with a knee-jerk reaction. Just genuinely get involved in the DEI space and listen to the person who's asking for the reasonable adjustments, because A, it's your duty under law, and B, a happy employee is a productive employee. Just do it. That's my 2 cents.
It's the right
I love your 2 cents. Guys, I think the core brought up something that I hear a lot. I don't know if you guys hear this as well. And I think it's people, the perception or the belief somehow that accommodations are a monetary cost that's exorbitant. And I think one of the things that, as we start to have conversations around accommodations, and I'm in my burnout restoration work, I'm asking, let's look at your needs. Let's look at like these top 30 human needs, and let's go through the list and let's see, well, what's met, and by the inverse, what is unmet, because burnout is consistent unmet needs to start with. And if we look at how we're translating that into what does that look like in support and boundaries and accommodations, so that need is consistently getting met for you, so that you are energized and you're able to do the things that you need to do in your work and in your life, most of those things are free. They don't cost money. They cost attention. They cost awareness. And to me, that's priceless, but it's not impacting the dollar, which is, the argument that I hear coming back from a lot of employers is this is going to cost us a lot of money. You know, I hear that a lot. Do you guys hear that? Or
Yeah.
that response?
Sometimes it's something so simple, though. It's like akin to saying to someone, do you take cream and sugar in your coffee? It's how would you rather be communicated with? And yeah, it costs nothing but conscious inclusion again.
Elizabeth put in the chat a good comment just about the idea of having a sample of a resource for the checklist. To me, it shouldn't be hard for people who have worked tirelessly to create the manager training, the opportunity decks, all of these resources that have been made for us to find them. I've so enjoyed meeting people that I've secretly met just so I could see if they'd be willing to share their resources, because in America, for some reason, that is just not the MO to just give out this information. Most of my knowledge has come from the UK. I've Google searched and they've been the ones that have put the PDFs, even the information that I'm finding hard to even hear in the conversation, such as women autistics. And I cannot tell you how excited I didn't mean not to disinclude the wonderful other voices that we have in this room, but the conversations and topics that are still on the outliers, since we're in this rabbit hole of accommodations, belonging, understanding, education, resource share. There's so much that can be done. So I'm grateful for people who are willing to share resources like you, because that's how we learn, is we discover what other people discovered about their abilities and needs.
Piper, I wonder whether that is a research and academic cultural difference, because here in the UK, in research and academics, we are obliged to share our findings for the public good. And I think with you, it's more protecting your intellectual property so that you can commercialize it, if I'm right?
You've absolutely spot on, because I was like, oh yes, of course, to share educational information in the academic field, we have to pay a publisher in order for it to be deemed worthy. And in the other half, it's free, it's out there. So very good observation and point to another barrier to consider, and geographic location and so much more.
Keep coming to the UK. If you need anything, just knock on our door. All right. I work with some brilliant researchers in autism and neurodivergence in general. So, drop me an email and see if I can connect you.
And guys, I love that we're having this sort of, I love where we go, just in a natural progression. But I think that's one of the things that's a really beautiful element. Thanks, Scott. That's a really beautiful element to our neurodistinct community. And that is, we as a community don't tend to show up from a lens of this is mine and I'm competing with everyone else around me. I've noticed we're more open to sharing. Like, oh, hey, I figured this out. Let me teach you, or let me show you. Or, this is something that helped me. Maybe this will help you too. Just as a global community, I find that we tend to be more open and sharing and willing to, say, hey, I have a solution that might help you. Would you like to try it out? Or here's what it is. And I do see a lot of, when we're talking about accessibility and we're talking about accommodations, especially in the United States, that lens of that's an unfair advantage. That's, that competition mindset of, eat or be eaten kind of approach. And I'm just like, oh, for the love of all things, please don't. No, there's a beautiful image that I've seen across social media. Maybe you guys have seen it too. And it's, you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's part of the conversation and like throughout the year, but that I really want to highlight with the Shine a Light campaign is that we're not here going fast necessarily, but we're here going together to go far by all of us coming together and sharing. And as we're sort of wrapping up this conversation, I know we're moving to the top of the hour here, but I want to talk about, and I want any of you guys that that have intersections, or you're from multiple intersections, because lots of us have lots of intersections in our life. Where are the barriers in accessibility in the workplace that maybe people aren't aware of? Maybe, because it may not be your intersection, what is that somebody else may be facing, so that we can make changes collectively, so that we can go far as humanity? What are some of those things? If any of you guys have those that you want to share, please share those with us.
Something close to me and on this panel, not too much ethnic diversity. We are white women who are privileged to have likely had enough money and medical resources to help our journey. And I think that's an unfair advantage that I would love to have more Black women, Black men discuss. Indian, I have not had a lot of opportunities to find other cultures and how they struggle outside of the UK, Canada, and America.
Yeah, I think it's important. So I'm biracial. My dad's British, and then my mom's Guyanese. So I also identify as Black sometimes, because that's part of my identity. And so just really understanding that, how we show up and how our intersectional identities impacts, like, being a woman, being racialized, being disabled, being neurodivergent, and how that impacts how we show up in the world and how the world views us. And also in the workplace, with D&I work, because I work as a D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging facilitator. A lot of times, companies still want to break it down into, like, okay, let's talk about disability, let's talk about race, let's talk about LGBT, they try to break it down to different sections. But a person brings the whole self into work, and that's not being addressed enough.
No, I agree. My business partner is Asian, and I see it every time. Whenever he walks in a room, he's being treated differently. He's dyslexic, and I think also autistic, and you just see it. He struggles to find roles. It's a constant struggle, and it's just not acceptable. I mean, I'm not a British native. I'm Dutch national, and I seem to be accepted more in conversations than he is, and I'm just not having it. It's not acceptable. So that intersection is really crucial. And as far as I understand it, neurodiversity in Asia is still very sensitive. It's considered a mental health issue, and that's very, very difficult. So, that is something that has to be changed very, very carefully with those people.
Really bad in certain countries. Like,
Yeah.
it's regarded as a curse, I've heard, in some
Yes.
African countries.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm very autism positive, so to me that's just really strange.
I mean, I have epilepsy. That was my first condition diagnosed, and whenever I'm asked, for a job interview, would you be willing to go to one of these countries, my question is always, how are you going to protect me? Because the moment I cross the border with my medications, I could be thrown into jail. So, I'm very conscious of that. And it needs to change, but how you change it, I guess it's only with the people of those countries and understanding, again, conscious inclusion. It's that nothing about us without us. We can't force it. It has to come from those cultures.
Yeah. We have, and Sydney, thank you for sharing that perspective of, we come as our whole person. We don't, they say, oh, leave those things at home and only show up with, your masked version of yourself at work. But that's not really practical. And do we really do that? No, we don't. And, I think it goes back to that compassionate curiosity. Also, it's just, be open to asking questions, be available to listen. Janelle Johnson is going to be on our healthcare panel. And, she asked me a question last year and it stopped me. And I went through a lot of diversity training learning more about inclusion and how to be more inclusive as part of the Junior League of Mobile and as part of Junior League International. And one of the trainers who has just been a wonderful mentor to me is Vicki Clark. And so much in my life has been impacted by learning to listen. And Janelle asked a question. Thank you, Jennifer. Janelle asked me a question not, last year, and she said, "Who's holding you accountable?" And I thought, gosh, I haven't looked outside of myself for someone to help hold me accountable. And I think that was something that really has made an impact on my life. And I appreciate Janelle for asking me that. And it's not about, any particular minority group or intersectional group having to be responsible for everything. It's all of us coming together to be responsible from a place of who's holding me accountable. Am I asking the person next to me? Am I asking the people around me? Am I paying attention? Am I listening? What are some ways that, when we're talking about accessibility in the workplace, what are some ways that are just for like your biggest insight, just showing up every day, knowing that people communicate differently from me. People may look differently from me. People may have a different, color or religious background or belief or accent or all of these different things. And instead of looking at it as that's what makes us different, well, sure, there's things that make us different, but what are also the things that bring us together? What are the things that we share commonality in? How are we doing this in our workplace? Because our workplace, we spend more time in our workplace with the people around us than we usually do at home with our families. Let's just be honest. What are some things, that stand out for you guys as your biggest insight around accessibility as we're wrapping up? Does anybody have anything? Because I know we're at the top of the hour. You guys need to go.
Oh, yeah. I have something. So a response to the people that say things like, oh, getting the interview questions in advance, that gives you an unfair advantage. Give them to everybody then. They advantage all humans, whether they're anxious or, when an expectation is to prepare for an interview. So what's the best way to prepare? Have a guess about what questions they might ask. Why not give the questions to everybody? So really good inclusion. It's a combination of universal design principles, which are there to help everybody, and individual needs.
I don't think any of us could have said it any better. Lex.
I think just to build on from that is one thing I would love to give. I'm so sorry, my dog's just barking. The one thing that I would love to change about the way that the workplace exists entirely is look at a strength-based approach to performance management, or celebrating how people perform, is looking at it from a strengths-based and not from a weakness having to bring them back up. And just mirroring what Charlie said, I think everything should be an opportunity to get the best out of people, and not and I mean, an interview process isn't the opportunity to be able to respond to quick fire questions really well. You're trying to eke out from somebody their brilliance, their expertise, and that's and it's not always in that environment that people thrive the best. So focusing at things from a point of strength based.
I have to go now. Thank
you.
You.
Thanks, Charlie. I know your daughters are starving. It's time for dinner. Bye. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being here and being part of this conversation around accessibility in the workplace and how we can start to create more conversations. Number one, could we please move "Are you a fit?" from a conversation from a hiring perspective? Can we start talking more about, listening to the barriers that you heard mentioned today? How are you as a company listening to the barriers that you heard mentioned today that are experienced not just in isolation in this one group, but this is things that we hear echoed throughout our community. And these are things that are there right now. What can you do? What are you doing? Are you listening? Are you looking at your hiring practices? Are you looking at your inclusion? Are you looking at the psychological safety? Are you looking at how are we asking and getting compassionately curious? And are we being inclusive around all of the people that work for us? Because it isn't about a competition, because we can either go fast or we can go far. And are we going to go far? And the Navy SEALs have a saying that smooth is fast, right? Smooth is fast and slow is smooth. So if we're being deliberate, we can go in a smooth way. And if we're going smooth, we can move faster. But we can do this together. And I think that's the important part, is that we're doing this together. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined me for this conversation today and these incredible advocates. If you have not yet followed them on social media, joined in the conversation that Cora kicked off today about these automated tracking systems and so much more. Scott Fraser always has a conversation starter on his post on LinkedIn as well. Be sure you join them. Make sure you follow them. If you are looking for accessibility and you are looking for more insights on what you can do with your company, please go check out all of the amazing advocates that have been part of this conversation today, and your voice. Add your voice to this conversation. Join the chat. Add some things that you've experienced around accessibility barriers or companies who are doing it really well. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to all of my guests. This has been an incredible conversation today, and I'll tell you what, we've got more coming up throughout the month of April. On Tuesday, we're going to be talking all about accessibility in public spaces, followed by Thursday, where we're going to be having a conversation about accessibility in healthcare, one of the biggest challenges for so many of us. Thank you for being here today. And hey, did you know we're part of XXO Connect?
Are you looking to experience healthier relationships with yourself and others while prioritizing your own well-being? Ready to remove layers of masking and get off the chronic cycle burnout loop? Mind Your Autistic Brain is a proud partner with XXO Connect. XXO Connect is a 100% live group and one-to-one video connection platform supporting your well-being through fun daily live rooms, connecting you to self, coaches, and community, including your ND community. Recharge inside self-care rooms. Activate mind-body-soul connection in live guided meditation rooms. Dive into mindset rooms with a former UFC MMA fighter. Restore energy in burnout prevention and recovery rooms. Raise your love signal with sex, dating, and relationship coaches. Align and elevate clarity in yoga and energy healing rooms. Experience deeper connection and healing in conscious community breathwork rooms. Improve your relationship with money in financial wellness rooms. Navigate life after divorce in parenting rooms. There's nothing like being in a room together, sharing energy together, supporting together, being coached together, healing together, feeling together, growing together. Live human connection every day, connection in every way. Living the whole human connection experience together on XXO Connect. Join me, Carol Jean Whittington, on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time every week for Neurodiverse Connection, where we focus on burnout restoration, communication in our relationships, and so much more. Sign up today to join XXO Connect and me at the link in the show notes below.